The universe is a cold and hostile place, and may be inhabited by ruthless civilizations or machine minds bent on destroying anything in their way. Today we'll be looking at Xenocide, which if you didn't already know is the alien equivalent of genocide, where you wipe out an entire intelligent species. This term was popularized by Orson Scott Card in his epic science fiction series built around the original two novels, Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead, which deal with a protracted war between humans and an alien civilization and its aftermath. The third book is titled Xenocide, and it's also the epithet human civilization gave the main hero of that war centuries after humanity won, and reconsidered the ethics of their actions. As you might guess, the book explores themes of if and when it can ever be acceptable to wipe out an alien civilization, and the book pulls few punches, starting with the title and the obvious allusion to genocide. That term itself was only coined in 1944, with World War II very much in mind. And the definition is a bit vague or debatable, but for today, we'll just go with the deliberate and systematic destruction of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. That's the first definition that came up on the internet for me, which is the sole reason for its specific selection. Etymologically, geno comes from the Greek genos for race or tribe, and side is to kill, and xeno means foreign or alien. As usual on topics like this, we're not really interested in determining a yes or no answer, but rather to find some of the right questions and caveats. For instance, xeno or alien didn't refer to bug-eyed monsters from Mars till last century, and prior to that just meant humans from far away. And in a space context, some colony of ours that's 100 light years away on some alien planet under an alien sun for several thousand years has likely diverged massively from us culturally and even genetically. They may have flat out used genetic engineering or cybernetics to make themselves more suited for their environment, or even being replaced by some other entity or species they created. It gets very easy to imagine a conflict arising and folks justifying or rationalizing extreme actions by saying, well, they're not even human anymore. And whether that's ethically relevant or not, it might be accurate enough from a biological or psychological sense. We'd also presumably contemplate genocide against some group of robots or AI we made, or some species of animal we uplifted, clever dog people or super chimps. And here folks might say things like they were unnatural, or didn't count, or even we made them so it's our right or duty to dispose of them if they have gone bad. And obviously, while our goal today is not to draw a lot of definite moral conclusions, we are approaching this from the standpoint that genocide itself is an evil thing. We can probably create some borderline cases for the sake of argument, and indeed we'll be doing that a lot for the topic of Xenocide, but we are starting from the context that these are inherently wrong, and we are looking at possible exceptions, not the other way around, much as we would for murder in a case like self-defense or accident. That said, an alien might not feel the same, and certainly humans often have not too. A given civilization might be expansionist and feel that a planet occupied by someone else implies no claim to ownership, that the strength of arms or cleverness is how that should be decided. If you are too weak to keep it, then that's on you, survival of the fittest and all that. And this Darwinian perspective is common in science fiction too, and one can certainly see how that perspective might be common in the universe. After all, it wasn't exactly uncommon even before Darwin. It is sort of the default landscape life forms operate in. So it is often the viewpoint of aliens in science fiction, and often in those stories, humans are fighting them or trying to convince them otherwise, or both. In science fiction context, it usually also means flat-out glassing planets, taking out the whole ecosystem, not just that intelligent species, and that specific case is sometimes called ecocide, though usually it's implying where we've come to a planet without intelligent life and wiped out that native ecology during terraforming. We have often noted that to any technological civilization, an entire alien ecology would be considered insanely valuable, not something to be casually deleted even if you were ethically indifferent. So this would probably happen much less in reality than in fiction. On the other hand, you could have Xenocide, where the intelligent species of a planet was intentionally wiped out, while the native ecology beyond that was carefully preserved. It's a fairly good in-universe explanation for why the invaders might send in foot troops and invasion forces instead of just dropping a swarm of relativistic kill missiles on a planet. Some folks also do cover cases where we're looking at a deliberate and systematic attempt to wipe out a civilization in a cultural sense, but I'd say it's more common for that to either be an unintended consequence from a more morally grey aggressor species, or the far more ruthlessly evil species torching whole worlds. Obviously how it's done and how well it's done depends on the writer, and that's a judgment on the skill of crafting a story, not the ethics of the fictional entities involved. In a story, I can create some hypothetical race of truly vile, always chaotic evil aliens and justify why it just isn't possible not to wipe them out. We can contemplate somehow changing their ways, which some might argue was wiping out their culture, but because they are fictional, can't really dissect that case too much. Often we examine evil empires, we start getting fridge logic disrupting things. Fridge logic, incidentally, refers to when you start thinking about the plot of whatever you were just watching or reading, the implication being you went to get a drink or snack and were staring into the fridge and thinking about plot points, story elements, or details that seem logical or acceptable while watching but raise questions or fall apart upon later reflection. And an awful lot of what we do on this show is apply fridge logic to science fiction in order to get a more realistic take on reality and the future. So if you enjoy that, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the show. I've recently been binge watching Stargate. It's right up there with Star Trek and Star Wars in my mind as a franchise. And the binging came about because I had a long talk with David Hewlett, who folks familiar with the franchise would recognize as Rodney McKay, the brilliant physicist in the Stargate Atlantis series. If you're curious, we've been doing a show prep for a later interview on his podcast, I'm with Genius, and ended up chatting for a couple hours as he was just a lot of fun to talk to. And again, I'm a huge fan of that show, so of course I binged my collection and noticed how many times Xenocide came up in there, and often by the good guys. Some spoilers to follow, though we'll keep it vague. Our original bad guys, at least for the TV show, are the Goa'uld, a species of parasitic serpent creatures that can get into humans and control their brains. They also have genetic memory of all their ancestors' knowledge. They took over primitive Earth at the dawn of civilization and planted humans all over the galaxy to serve as hosts and slaves, but got kicked off Earth thousands of years ago, and the plot involves teams from modern Earth traveling the galaxy using the rediscovered Stargates to various worlds, mostly ones where relatively primitive humans are being ruled over by a small number of aliens who also pretend to be the gods. They are the main bad guys for most of the original show. We also have their more honorable cousins, the Tok'ra, the Replicators, a species of machines, indeed two separate ones with similarities, the Ancients, the Ori, the Wraith, the Asgard, the Nox, the Furlings, and some others, including the Jaffa, the Ashen, and the Tolans, who are all originally human but are pretty divergent to the point of being distinct. Unlike Star Trek, most of the alien cultures we meet are human cousins transplanted to plants thousands of years back, so the total number of actual aliens with different evolutionary homeworlds is relatively minimal in the setting. And some, like the Asgard, Wraith, Ancients, Ori, and Replicators, originate from distant galaxies. And when I thought about it, most of them either did some Xenocide themselves, got wiped out, or both. And when they did get wiped out, it was sometimes by the protagonists from modern Earth. We do see divergent splits between a lot of these ancient races too, like the Goa'uld and the Tok'ra, Ancients and Ori, even the Asgard, who by default are the good guys of the series, or good little grey men. And these are typically not one-episode baddies either, they stick around for seasons and get deep and varied portrayals. The Ori and the Replicators are the only ones who get flat-out murdered off by humans, in both cases using technology left behind by the Ancients, who are basically ancient humans from another galaxy, the ones the Ori inhabited. They fled to the Milky Way millions of years back and created that Stargate network. They are ultra high-tech and mostly very moral, and also mostly extinct or ascended to a higher plane of existence where they don't get involved for Star Trek Prime Directive style non-interference reasons. They essentially fled their galaxy millions of years back and left it to the Ori, who eventually ascend themselves and keep other humans around to feed on their souls. You could argue the Ori getting wiped out is not Xenocide. But given that we're talking millions of years of divergence and lots of artificial alteration, they should probably be considered entirely distinct from everybody else in the setting and vice versa. The Ori, the Goa'uld, Wraith, and Ashen are all pretty casual about wiping others out, and are implied to have done it in the past and off-screen a lot too. As those who survived the series, spoilers again to follow, those wiped out entirely or very nearly so by the series' end include the Goa'uld, the Tok'ra, the Asgard, the Ori, the Replicators, multiple times and from multiple origins, the Tolans, and the Furlings, who we never actually meet or learn much about. I'm not including anyone who we only meet or hear of from just one episode either. The moral case for both the Ori and Replicators isn't too bad. They were utterly dominating every fight with the humans and their allies, and the former wanted to convert us into their slaves and eat our souls, and the other wanted to convert us into themselves. As the name Replicator implies, they exist mostly to make more of themselves, like an unchained von Neumann probe, paperclip maximizer, or the Borg from Star Trek, or for that matter most regular life forms in nature. The Borg are an interesting case too, as they, or it, is obviously composed of many different species since it assimilates everyone. It's a hive mind, so killing it is arguably just regular murder, not genocide or xenocide, and honestly it's a pretty simple case of self-defense too. Alternatively, wiping out a multi-species empire maybe isn't xenocide, as it might involve hundreds of species as one group, like the Federation from Star Trek, but it might be that tons of members of most or all those species are part of other empires too. That might get very iffy then, as if we'd imagine blowing up a convention center hosting fans of a sci-fi franchise from all over the world, that's obviously mass murder, but doesn't really meet the earlier genocide definition of deliberate and systematic destruction of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. One could see how a group motivated by a shared passion could become one with time and space though. You might have sprawling galactic civilizations where hundreds of species each have quadrillions of members spread around, and where some individual star system or cluster of them was formed by those who aligned to a specific religion or ideology but were drawn from all over the galaxy, and if someone comes by and vaporizes them, that would seem to fit the bill. What happens when civilizations clash on a cosmic scale? In our Nebula exclusive episode, The Big Alien Theory, we delve into the fascinating dynamics of alien civilizations shaped by their physical size and resource needs. Could larger alien species, with their vast energy demands, struggle to sustain technological advancements or build thriving societies? How might these challenges impact their ability to compete in a galaxy teeming with potential rivals? Explore these thought-provoking questions and more in The Big Alien Theory, available only on Nebula. Head over today to join the discussion and unlock this exclusive episode, along with all our monthly Nebula exclusives and thousands of episodes from many other awesome creators like Real Engineering, The Science Asylum, Simon Clark, and more, including ambitious Nebula originals like Real Science's Becoming Human series on the evolution of humans. Sign up at go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur using the code IsaacArthur to get 40% off an annual plan, making it $3 a month. Nebula also offers lifetime memberships and gift options, so you can share awesome content like the Big Alien Theory with friends and family. Just go to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. And now, let's get back to our show. Of course, it's arguable that sheer body count is what mostly matters. 1 billion murder victims for any reason is quite heinous in its own right, so the specific motivation or criteria might be secondary. These are all fictional examples too, and intentionally so. The topic is emotionally charged enough without thinking of real-world examples. And I'd encourage folks not to bring them up in the comments either, or at least be thoughtful about how you're making your point with it. Probably the most familiar justification for when the good guys do it is that they literally had no choice. It was us or them, and they attacked us first and simply would not stop. We didn't have any other choice, or at least we could not see another at the time, based on what we knew. That seems pretty decent too, though again we are reliant on the storyteller justifying why no reasonable peace deal was ever viable. Mustache twirly evil is often the default. We see this with the orcs from Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien even raised the issue of how a civilization existing on a volcanic wasteland and being vicious and evil should seem to have problems existing, and also whether or not those orcs really are utterly and irredeemably evil, which is debatable under the canon, and fans and detractors of the recent Rings of Power show certainly have been debating it of late, as is something of a plot point. We also see it in a lot of other fantasy. D&D often has evil alignments for entire races. The Dark Elves or Drow come to mind, though also open up story options like Dris Durodin, a Drow who seeks to be a good guy. But we see how his homeland operates, and it's crazy evil and murderous, and indicated that they are evil by nurture, not nature. And nurture versus nature, and which is dominant, is an ancient discussion and question. It's mostly an academic question though, because civilizations like that really cannot exist. If you can't go 5 minutes without a dominance fight to see who is in charge, and ends in death most of the time, you just can't keep your numbers up. That's why even mostly non-social organisms tend to have a lot of escalation steps in fighting that limit injury. Look up the behavior of lobsters fighting each other sometime for details. People are hard to replace though. Even overpopulated dystopias can only spare people so fast and not become rapidly underpopulated, so even active battles tend to have lower casualty ratings than a lot of fictional bad guys have during minor policy debates. In a series where they go on for a while, these numbers either get ignored or get some sort of workaround, like they use cloning tanks, or just acknowledge that most of the society doesn't operate that way, which would also tend to imply you don't need to purge it out of existence to end the behavior. On the flip side, a high-tech civilization that did have a lot of virtual reality or mind upload backups might really have seemingly huge and constant internal death rates just because it wasn't really dying. When the crazy overlord randomly stabs one of his lieutenants for failure or to prove a point, it's more like a symbolic demotion or suspension, and maybe they all have unrestrained anger management issues because they don't actually need to restrain them much. Sorry I stabbed you in the chest 50 times at that meeting last week might be on par with someone in the office apologizing for shouting. But even then, they still can't function as interstellar species if they casually go around dropping nukes or glassing planets. As I often say, technology opens doors. Some of them might lead to crazy places. And while I sometimes suspect crazy is a prerequisite for technological civilizations, your civilization cannot survive being certain kinds of crazy, or being terminally stupid, which is often the case in retrospection for a lot of aliens. As an example, spoilers, the series I mentioned earlier by Orson Scott Card revolves around a brilliant young boy, Ender, who was raised on Earth during a period where we survived 2 hostile invasions by unknown bug-like aliens seemingly bent on wiping us out. He's being trained from a young age to be a fleet officer for the next war, and he and his youthful peers are engaged in fleet simulations late in their education, commanding simulated ships against alien fleets. There's no FTL travel in this universe, at least at this time, so the deeper their fleets are in the alien empire and the simulations, the older the models and weaker the ships, against progressively stronger elements. He is eventually faced with unbeatable odds with a tiny fleet arriving at the alien homeworld, the Formics or Buggers as they are called. He deploys a planet-killer weapon against it in a desperate maneuver and succeeds. He gets yanked out of the simulation to people hugging him and crying and telling him that they don't have FTL travel, but they do have FTL communication, and it wasn't a simulation for months now. He had been commanding the actual battle fleets. He promptly has a nervous breakdown since they've been pushing him to the limit for a very long time, and just told him he not only commanded untold millions of humans to their deaths in battle, he literally lost everyone deployed in that last battle when the planet exploded, and he just killed off an entire alien species that he'd worked hard to understand in order to better predict. Book 2, and it's more of a duology than a sequel, picks up with him living incognito thousands of years later, surviving by relativity slowing time on his journeys, in an era that regrets killing the buggers off, and where he is regarded as the worst monster in history, an opinion he largely shares, all the more so as he found a backup egg of one of their queens who he can speak to telepathically, and who tells him how sorry they were and how they hope one day to be able to live again in peace. Humanity has, at the start of the series, finally encountered a second intelligent race and is very determined, initially anyway, not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Wonderful pair of books, and I hate spoiling them even that much, but Book 2, which is arguably the original book, lays that all out at the beginning anyway. problem is, the buggers were terminally stupid. The story is presented to us as them being a hive mind and not having a language and not realizing humans were individuals or being able to speak to us. Their protagonist learns their history when he finds one of their eggs on one of the planets we conquered after the war, and indeed writes that history out anonymously to become the author of the books that vilified him. And he is pretty angst-ridden, albeit justifiably so in the novels. The novels themselves, though, as the sequels come out, show us aliens who arrive while we are spacefaring and dissect our ships and crews, and still go attack Earth. You can justify them thinking of killing individuals as no more than killing a cell in a bigger organism, but that's still at the very least some sort of assault on another intelligent organism. And even if you didn't think the individual people are that, the spaceships they were in and the spacesuits they were wearing are very obviously the product of an intelligent being, who very obviously control the war you then proceed to attack, and barely failed at. They then did it again with a giant fleet some decades later, which circumvented any excuses of it being an accident or not having time to think about it and realize you were making a mistake. Canonically, they realized after this they were in the wrong and could think of no way to let us know or apologize, and simply chose to let themselves be wiped out. But fought tooth and nail anyway, which later gets justified as it turns out the individual buggers do have motivation and thoughts of their own that the queens have to telepathically suppress constantly. So they were letting them fight in self-defense because they couldn't really have stopped it. Bit of an example of a retcon that makes things worse, since it's presumably meant to justify why they wanted to take it on the chin out of guilt, but could not, yet instead show the queens as horribly enslaving intelligent individuals, who they also use like disposable trinkets. So the original tragic alien invaders get recast unintentionally as terminally stupid in later works, then also fundamentally tyrannical in yet later ones, though obviously the author wasn't aiming to have that been the takeaway. It's just the byproducts of patching the plot, which is generally necessary for expanding series over the decades. They are, after all, made up. Really good stories attract lots of readers who spend a lot of time thinking about the plot and asking for sequels. I generally only pick on stories and franchises I like, and even other great classics like Dune or Asimov's Foundation are full of scientific flaws and plot holes big enough you could drive an invasion fleet through them. Dune, for instance, is fundamentally based on the ability to psychically predict the future, the scarcity of water, one of the most common elements in space, in civilizations with cheap space travel, and genetic memory. As a side note, genetic memory partially justifies the bad guys in Stargate, the Goa'uld, the snake parasites with genetic memory, since they inherit their evil ancestors' very evil deeds and attitudes, so they kind of are born evil, much as a copy of your mind, or serial killers, awakening in a new body presumably is very similar in behavior to the original. Alien motivations and origins are often best left vague in fiction, especially when they cause behavior that is weird to us. But while Orson Scott Card is very clearly opposed to wiping out aliens, even during wars, he does go on to discuss the sorts of scenarios where you might have no choice or where it might be justified. He gives us a later example of another set of aliens who literally communicate by mind control and ecocide, and who seemingly lack any context for being able to imagine doing otherwise. If the aliens you encounter have no basis for dialogue or conversation or friendship, or even escalation of conflict, because everything is a binary encounter, win or die, to become a puppet of the winner, and the organism on top has literally never lost as long as its memory goes back, which is as long as that organism has had a memory, you might have a real problem convincing that creature to change its approach or even to speak to you. It doesn't know what that means and simply does not have a template for a peaceful coexistence or even a temporary truce. Every action is viewed as an attack of some kind, and that's all it ever considers itself. Now, we can say that it would be impossible to speak to it, but it really is not. It could be captured, studied down to the neuron level, and physically hardwired with the necessary brain augmentation to understand. Though for context, imagine aliens capturing you, scanning your brain, and sticking in hardware designed to alter your thinking by changing your mind, or at least your perception with the intent of altering your thinking by persuasion. That's a very gray matter at best, messing out with someone's gray matter that way. I'd probably be okay with it done to me, but for the same reason I wouldn't hold a grudge if someone shot me because they couldn't otherwise explain that I was unintentionally killing people. I do not want to do massively evil things even by accident, and would prefer someone stop me by any means necessary if it came down to it, though I would certainly prefer they kept the intervention as minimal as reasonably possible. I'd imagine most of us feel that way, and to be honest, personally, I'm not overly worried about folks who do not. As well, on principle, it's still bad to brainwash the evil alien overmind to want to be nice. I doubt I'd lose much sleep over it either, assuming we'd explored some other options first. Hive minds are weird cases anyway, and in certain situations, fighting that overmind might mean you are freeing or killing trillions of individuals it has enslaved to its will, though they might remain fanatically loyal to it even after it got shut off, since it has probably changed their minds rather than spending effort constantly suppressing them. I generally hold that if you are quickly and forcibly altering someone's personality, you're more or less killing them by erasing that personality, that person. But your mileage may vary, and it's not like we have tons of real-world examples of alien psychology to examine. We also have our artificial minds case, and as a pair of examples to close out our discussion as food for thought, I'd like to imagine we unleash some terraforming robots on the galaxy, and also that we bred up some super intelligent pets. Imagine we made smart cats or dogs. We will probably do this at some point, and arguably have been selectively breeding for that, in reverse to selective breeding for our livestock, which is generally for dumb and passive. This isn't a magic step to a cat or a dog as smart as you or I, but probably many minor tweaks over centuries that does not create a binary state of regular dogs and smart dogs, but a wider landscape of options of various degrees of intelligence and behavior and probably physiology, like some having opposable thumbs grown too. At some point, someone creates a full human equivalent that can breed more of itself, and this may be illegal or something done gradually over millennia too, but it ends up happening. This critter also has children annually in litters of 4 to 8, and with the same low mortality rate modern humans have, so it is doubling its new species number more than annually, rather than every 20 years or couple centuries like we might. What do you do about that? Forcibly sterilize them? Tell them they can't have kids more often than humans do? Kill them off? Shrug and suggest humans increase their own breeding rate? Or die off or end up as a tiny sliver of civilization inside their bigger one in a few centuries? None of those sounds like very appealing options, so it might be wise not to create human smart animals, but you don't have to do that to be stuck with the situation if someone else did it. Killing off an intelligent creature because someone else unwisely made them is still murder. Something a bit like this comes up in the Mass Effect franchise with the Krogan, a violent and fast-breeding race some other aliens uplifted to do their fighting for them, and then introduce a plague into to control their numbers later when the war is over but they still want to fight. Same for our last case. Imagine a country here on Earth sometime next century or two builds some von Neumann probes, and decides to make them human smart and also super loyal to us, sends them out to explore the galaxy and prepare it for us, and intentionally or accidentally builds those machines so they are fanatically devoted to seeking out strange new worlds, finding intelligent life, and wiping it out to protect us from future possible threats. They truly love us and want to serve us and help us spread over the whole galaxy, and keep sending back images of worlds they've prepared for us, sometimes complete with pyramids of alien skulls. I am not sure what you would do about that, but I can imagine a lot of folks saying, well, we didn't build them, and they'll never stop unless we actually kill them, which would be Xenocide too, so maybe we just let it happen. After all, they have such a head start we could never catch them anyway, and if we attack them, they might turn on us. Which is a disturbingly realistic problem to raise, but also a good one to close out on, because we worry that aliens or AI might be ultra-Darwinistic and just pursue a xenocidal approach of eternal expansion. But at least under known science, this actually isn't clearly logical and viable. The current state of the universe, under known science, implies nobody is going around consuming all in its path. We've discussed that before as the Dyson Dilemma, which is essentially the original episode of this show discussing aliens and the Fermi Paradox. Over long enough timelines, any civilization or entity that is capable of expanding or using natural resources is probably going to, and if it doesn't, someone else probably will. This is basically the conceptual foundation of the show's default view that the most likely answer to the Fermi Paradox, or maybe the least unlikely answer, is that we're just the first intelligent critters to arise in our region of the universe and able to settle the galaxy. Nobody ever gets FTL. Light speed is your limit, and your default universe is the grabby alien one, where we and maybe a few thousand other alien civilizations thus far, some older than us by a billion years, are all just racing out and claiming empty space, but space is so huge, many billions of galaxies, that even folks traveling at near light speed and starting a billion years ago have still only settled a small portion of space. At some point they start seeing each other, likely millions of years before they physically bump into each other, and there's no supercluster scale wars going on because they're not huge spheres of civilizations crashing into each other. They are tiny surfaces of individual civilizations, maybe a few dozen light years across, with loose ties to their distant cousins, many of which are pretty alien to them already, and probably include a lot of artificial or engineered life too. The homeworld isn't sending armadas to go save them from the aliens because it's a 100 million year delay on signal lag, and they don't actually care what happens to the mutant freaks they've actually never heard of among the 100 trillion systems their cousins and creations have settled in the last billion years. Now the exception to that is if life turns out to be a bit more common and you're getting non-stop radio chatter from tons of different alien civilizations about how somebody keeps plowing into them and wiping out planets. If you're an expansionist empire, somehow coordinating an expanding battlefront over untold light years and signal lag, you eventually reach a point where you are running into folks who've lived long enough to shout a warning about what you are doing, or who had enough astronomical assets to see you do it to the last guy and send out a cry for help, even if just for the hope of posthumous vengeance. As you expand, all your logistical problems keep going up, which includes the issue of your ever more distant forces on the front lines being ever more divergent from you, which might be upsetting if you're xenocidal maniacs like the Daleks from Doctor Who. With no aliens nearby, chunks of your purest empire might decide some other elements of it need purging or exterminating. You have forces giving up, changing sides, and so on. Alternatively, your battlefront keeps expanding, and the opposition doesn't actually need to coordinate with each other. Each progressive layer gets longer advance notice and more detailed intel as you fight your way out. And whether the aliens you meet are benevolent or just as nasty as you are, they have every reason to fight you tooth and nail. Nobody seems to be cannibalizing whole galaxies to make weapons out of them, so if I'm a xenocidal AI thinking about killing off my creators or some alien new on the galactic stage who spots a primitive homeworld or some other aliens ripe for stealing, I need to think on that a bit, because space rises with the cube of distance. So if I find one alien species within 100 light years of my homeworld, I would expect to find 1,000 within 1,000 light years, and 1,000,000 within 10,000 light years. I probably should assume some of those are older than me and that they were smart enough to consider this path of grabbing everything and wiping out all the competitors. For some reason, they have not. This is a good warning that you probably should think twice about it. That ripe, primitive world might be bait for a trap. They may be prone to wiping out aggressors. There may be some rule about sticking to your own corner of space and leaving others alone. And if you break it, you're considered fair game by unethical aliens who follow the rules. Who knows? But the apparent state of the universe would not seem to indicate anyone is doing the crush and conquer or exterminate path. And we can interpret that as maybe nobody's around yet who could do it. But if we flat out start encountering other intelligent life, then we should conclude it's reasonably common and someone in the wider area is older and tougher than us. Thus, if contemplating Xenocide is a real option because you've encountered some aliens to do it to, even if your ethics don't stop you, your common sense should probably warn you that others probably came before and thought of trying it too, and found a reason not to. So you might want to think twice about reasons not to yourself, in case one of those turns out to be there's a large enforcement fleet that doesn't approve of Xenocide, but makes exceptions for those who do. Hopefully, we never encounter or become anyone willing to test that theory.